Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. We have people from around the world tuning into this, the very first of the EUROCONTROL Hard Talks, with the special theme of how do we build back better after the pandemic. This is the first, as I said, in a series of these conversations. We should be having them once a fortnight, once every 2 weeks from now until the end of the year. And with the very specific requirement that we try to work out what on earth we can do to get out of where we are at the moment. We couldn't have a better guest for our first session, because if any airline has managed to do well during the pandemic, it's Wizz. And we're just delighted to have the CEO of Wizz, Mr. József Váradi, with us today for this conversation. But before we have the conversation with József, I'd like very much to ask the DG of EUROCONTROL, Mr. Eamonn Brennan, if he'd be so kind as to set the scene for us. If you are of sensitive disposition, it's probably a good idea to turn away now, but I'd like to ask Eamonn if he'd be so kind as to tell us exactly what the situation is at the moment in Europe. Thank you.
Good afternoon from EUROCONTROL. It's a great pleasure to have József Váradi, CEO of Wizz, with us today, and I look forward to an excellent interview. So just before we get started, I think it's important we put some context on where we are today. As you know, the COVID-19 impact on European aviation has been extremely severe over the last number of months. We've lost 4.2 million flights, 1.2 billion passengers we normally expect to travel are not travelling, and many people think it will be 2024 before we have a recovery. The key thing for the European economy, we have lost 140 billion in lost revenue, and that's just to airlines, airports, ANSPs, and countless more to the national authorities. So the COVID has been a very significant impact, and it'd be really interesting to how József sees that we can recover from this. What's really important to look at is it's a worldwide phenomenon. Europe, flights are 47% down, so we're basically operating today in Europe half the flights we were operating this day last year. International flights, that's long-haul flights, nearly 70% down. But look at USA, China, Middle East, it's the exact same right throughout the globe. And interestingly, you can see that China domestic has started to recover a bit with just a 13% of a reduction. But how has this affected airlines? The key thing is to look at the top 7 airlines in Europe. You can see, for instance, that all of them are experiencing the same problem. EasyJet, 60% reduction, and you see Wizz Air there, with József will be with you in a moment, 26% reduction, operating a busier schedule than most. But this has affected all the airlines, and particularly airlines that are hub and spoke carriers like Air France and British Airways and KLM. They have been really severely impacted, and significantly, many of them have been bailed out by their national governments as well. And also it's important to realise that everybody in the value chain is in trouble. Airports, passengers are down 71%, Airbus are in difficulty, manufacturers are difficulty, ground handlers, people who sell coffee. This is something that is affecting the industry right from the top to the bottom. And then, of course, we have all these state restrictions. Every month, we thought we were making progress. We now have quarantines been introduced in the United Kingdom, quarantines in Belgium, Germany, Hungary, and we have various testing. And the problem really for the industry in Europe is we have no common response. The Commission are currently working on this, and I welcome this proposal, but we need to make it happen. If the virus is the same throughout Europe, then in similar circumstances, we should expect a similar response. And this is why it's nearly impossible for aviation to plan. And we're seeing big difficulties all throughout Europe with this. The result is nobody wants to book a flight. They're afraid to be stranded, they're afraid they won't get back, or they're afraid of actually the whole travel. So it's not the travel experience, it's not the airlines. The governments, in my view, need to get their act together and sort out this. Finally, if I could just say to you, the traffic scenarios. We have produced traffic scenarios over the last number of months, and we produced these in April. They've been alarmingly accurate. Unfortunately, we're now seeing that in the last number of weeks, we're dipping below our forecast, and we'll reissue them. What we're seeing in the last 10 days is due to quarantines, cancellations by all the airlines, and very big difficulty. So I know József and Andrew, you're going to give us a very good discussion today. I just thought it was useful to set the kind of scene, and I wish the two of you the very best. Hard Talk. Thank you from EUROCONTROL.
Thank you, Eamonn. Thank you very much. Although I'm not sure thanks is what we need. They are really very stunning numbers. But what is interesting in those numbers, amongst the many interesting things in those numbers, is that Wizz Air, with a 26% drop in its traffic, has in fact done better, or has preserved its network better than almost anybody else. So let's just start our conversation with József by watching a very short video that EUROCONTROL has put together.
I think innovation needs to be in the veins. I mean, it needs to be in the blood. If you are able to create that culture, you don't get complacent with your own performance, but you are always on the road of challenging yourself and trying to find better ways of doing business. I think that creates innovation in the system.
Is under huge pressure from a liquidity perspective. I mean, Wizz Air is standing out with that regard. Wizz Air has been really carrying the flag of aviation and the airline industry when it comes to recovery. We have recovered over 70% of our capacity versus last year, versus the industry level recovery of around 40% as we speak. Demand of consumers is changing to some extent, that people want to have more certainty in a way that they can travel, or if not, they want to have more flexibility to change their tickets, and they are prepared to pay for it.
So thank you. With that, it's time to welcome József Váradi, the CEO of Wizz Air. Wizz, a new business model carrier, a low-cost carrier based in Budapest. So, József, Eamonn's figures are really very scary, aren't they? 140 billion lost euros, 4.2 million fewer flights, 1.2 billion fewer passengers. But in all that, Wizz Air seems to have done better than most. What's the secret to your success?
Well, I also welcome everyone joining this conference, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I don't know if you can talk about any success in the industry. I mean, certainly we've been trying to do our best, and maybe we have come across as somewhat better than the rest of the industry. But we are not immune from the situation. I mean, we are severely impacted by the pandemic, and not the pandemic itself, rather the history around the pandemic, including the economic impact and all the political agendas kind of flowing into this. I think this whole pandemic management has become a very complex animal by now, because it is much more than managing the health issues of the virus itself. Having said that, we have been trying to stay as agile as we could have been. And we looked at demand, and we continue to adjust the capacity according to demand. And as a matter of fact, it's not only that we were trying to be rational and trying to realign our capacity planning to the new consumer realities, but we also started creating a new network, and we removed aircraft from our existing operating bases, and we put them up into new operating bases. Just over the last 5 to 6 months, we opened up 10 new operating bases. We redeployed close to 30% of our capacity. I think what it really gives us is a different level of diversification post-pandemic. So we continue to invest into our future. But the other aspect of our business, which I think is important, is that we are one of the very few airlines in the world that has been taking new aircraft deliveries. almost all other airlines have deferred aircraft deliveries or cancelled aircraft orders, but we have continued our aircraft delivery program, which is quite significant. And we think the relevance of this is that post-pandemic, we will benefit from a new technological platform that will give us a lower cost base in operation relative to the industry. And also, once the green agenda comes back into play again, especially in Europe, we think we will be in a much better position than the industry. So we are also trying to build a long-term sustainable competitive advantage for the business.
Wow. I presume also you can get the aircraft pretty cheap at the moment, leaving everything else aside. I'm really interested that you talk about the green agenda, because what we seem to be at the moment is very much at the mercy of the regulators. Hungary closed its borders again last weekend, I noticed. Do you think the fact that you've got bases all across Europe is going to get you ahead of those regulatory decisions?
You know, I think we are greatly benefiting from the level of diversification we have achieved. We are operating to 45 countries. We have more than 30 operating bases in around 20 countries. So that gives us a significant degree of resilience versus those who are reliant on one single market, because if something goes wrong in that market, basically that jeopardizes the whole performance of the company. But you know, what we have been experiencing over the past few months is that some markets underperform, but you know, we had offsetting markets that did better than average, and then things started flipping, and then the strong markets became weak, and the weak markets became strong. So we have been able to benefit from that level of diversification. But as you said, you know, we are at the mercy of governments, and Eamonn said it very rightly. It is a shame that we have not been able to act on the situation on a common basis, on an orchestrated, coordinated basis in Europe. Every country went its own way, and it has become really a zoo. I mean, 45 countries we are operating to, and we don't find 2 countries that would have applied the same set of measures. So I think that's a shame, and now we are in the second wave of restrictions, and still we are learning nothing from the you know, from the lessons in the first period. So it is really bad. I think it is a very ineffective and inefficient way of managing this crisis.
So what should we have learnt from the first wave?
Well, I think from a system perspective, what we learned is that we would have done much better should we have put in place standards on a European basis. Standards to look at things the same way, measures to be applied on a European basis as opposed to going country by country. In terms of an airline, I think what we have learned is that you have to be very agile and very adaptable. You are basically running this business on a day-by-day basis, and as the circumstances change, you have to change with those circumstances. So that's why we have moved a lot on the organization, on the assets, on the network design of the airline. And I think this is going to continue for some period of time, because I would be expecting quite a roller coaster going forward. I don't think there is a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery, which we were debating months ago. I think it's going to be really like a roller coaster. So we're going to be going up and down for some time.
So putting a few of the things you just said together, one, a need for a consistent policy, and 2, flexibility and the ability to move around, that seems like the perfect moment to talk about slots, which seems to be the only consistent policy we have seen in all of Europe so far. But it's a policy that you're very much opposed to, the policy that we just simply extend the slot waiver. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, because I think the current policy just makes no sense at all. I mean, just think about this. What we are doing here. So we are protecting airlines from competition who could actually do something on the basis of market terms. So if you take Wizz, we have, I think, very nicely ramped up our operations in the UK. We are ready to move and do more at Gatwick, London Gatwick. Gatwick is operating only 20% of its capacity at the moment, but we can't get access to the airport because incumbent carriers are holding slot positions, despite the fact they don't operate. You know, market forces cannot play in, and you know, we can't put capacity into the airport. As a result of that, the whole airport is desperate. They had to lay people off. The whole industry had to lay quite a lot of people off. So I think this is like a perfect lose-lose scenario. Certainly, society is losing. I think it is a fraud on the taxpayer, and it is just preserving the inefficient carriers who are unable to operate. And I bet you that 6 months from now, you will have the very same discussion that the slot waiver will have to be extended because the industry is still severely impacted by the crisis. I think this is just not fair. This is not level playing field, and it has to change.
You're not going to get me taking on that bet because I happen to agree with you, as a matter of fact. I'm sure we will. But let's talk for a minute then about those other carriers that are hoarding these slots, that are the incumbents, if you like. Who do you see as your biggest competitor? Do you see it as the other low-cost carriers, or do you see it as the network carriers?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's kind of the way we look at competition. I think our single biggest challenge is to get more people into the franchise of flying. And before we are competing with other airlines, actually we are competing with other means of transportation. And we just want to make sure that more people are accessing the infrastructure of flying, what we can bring to the party. If you just take a number here, so in Central and Eastern Europe, the penetration level of the airline sector is probably around 16%. So only every sixth person in society flies. While you look at the Western European numbers, it's more like every second person flies. So we have a long way to get people into the franchise before we compete with other airlines. And personally, I think that competition is actually good, not only to the consumer who benefits from the choices of products and services, but as a matter of fact, it's also good to the airlines who are competing, because simply competition makes them a better business. And this is really a problem. And if you look at all the bailouts that have been put in place to save some national carriers, actually that money has not been used for transforming the business models of those airlines. That money has just been used for being wasted. And I bet you a few months down the line, all these airlines will be crying back to their governments for more state aid because they just lost all that money at that time. And I think it is a pity. It is distorting the market, and it's achieving nothing.
I couldn't agree again. I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about that second wave of state aid, much more troubling, I think, than the second wave of the virus. What would you like to see the industry look like instead of simply propping up the industry that we used to have?
Look, I mean, I don't think there is a written law that just for the fact that an airline has been existing for 50 years or 100 years, it has to still exist in 100 years from now. So let just the market sort this out. I mean, if you look at other industries, you are seeing companies coming and going. I mean, there is a life cycle to companies. There is a life cycle to industries. There are disruptive newcomers. There is innovation coming in and kind of sorting the industry out differently versus its historical establishment. It's not happening in the airline industry because of the politics playing into it, and because of the governments coming into play when they shouldn't, and they should just let the market sort things out. If I look at the very current situation, what we are achieving at this point in time, we are just preserving the inefficiencies. We are just preserving the legacies of the airline business, as opposed to letting innovation to flourish and go through the industry. And let the structural winners to redefine the market and redefine the industry. I think this is a problem, and it almost feels like with all the actions put in place by governments, we are moving backwards 15, 20 years in this industry.
Only 15 or 20 years. Gosh, I wish I shared your optimism. Have you received any state aid at all then?
No. We are on our own, Andrew. I mean, we have no place to hide. We are not an airline of any particular country. I mean, we are associated with a lot of countries. As a matter of fact, we are the largest airline in a number of countries, but we are not a national carrier, so to say, of any country. So, we need to deal with the situation ourselves, and we have been very responsible with that regard, because it's not enough just to look good in good times in the industry, but you have to build resilience to deal with the bad times. I mean, you as an economist learn it in the first lesson that this is a cyclical business, and good times are followed by bad times. And you as a business have to be ready for dealing with those circumstances as well. And if you look at all these magnificent state-owned carriers who looked pretty good a couple of years ago, they got blown up by the crisis within days after the breakout of the pandemic. And someone should think about this, why this is happening and what should change. The problem, I think, is that the legacies are so strong in this industry that they are almost impossible to be changed sufficiently. That's why more credit should be given to newcomers new players in the market like ourselves, and as opposed to blocking our way to grow the business and take over some of the consumer franchises. We should be supported because this is the future. And I think, if there is something you can call European, that's certainly Wizz Air. I mean, we are not a legacy of any country. If you want to promote the European idea, you should be promoting Wizz Air from a regulatory standpoint.
So you said earlier that you saw your growth largely in Eastern Europe. I think it's fair to say, where 1 in 6 people travel, whereas in Western Europe it's 1 in 2, or nearer to 1 in 2. So you still see your growth in Eastern Europe, but do you see yourself turning to Western Europe more as well?
I think our niche remains Central and Eastern Europe, and we will stay focused on Central and Eastern Europe. Having said all of that, I think we are also looking at the opportunity as they arise, and certainly given the current times, we are talking about issues mostly, but every crisis is sorting the structural winners from the structural losers. So there are significant opportunities as well. So we also have to think about post-pandemic times, how you want to see this industry to look like, and how do you see yourself in that industry. So I think we continue to keep an eye on the future and opportunities in front of us. So this is why we keep investing into new initiatives, investing into our future. So I think it is very important that we don't close our eyes on the future, and we don't get dragged into just dealing with the issues of the day.
Well, that's probably a good moment to ask you a slightly broader industry question. What's your vision for how the airport sector of the aviation industry will develop from here?
Well, I mean, we like certainly the competitive nature of airport developments. I think that is very helpful. That has made the industry, I think, far more efficient. If you look at all those legacy airports, the likes of Schiphol, Frankfurt, Heathrow, those sort of airports, they have become very inefficient operationally. I mean, you keep the airplanes on the ground more than flying the airplanes. They are very expensive. They are overcomplicated, and I very much promote the idea of competition, having more airport opportunities, and I think that has to be maintained, because I think it's just creating more efficiency in the industry. Personally, I think that this is a temporary dent on the aviation industry. We're gonna go through this. We will recover from this. Not at the same pace. I think various players in the industry will come out of this very differently. The efficient low-cost carriers, the ultra-low-cost model, will come out first and robust from this, and these financially weak intercontinental hub airlines will come out last and probably weak, but they have the states and governments to support them. So, but the airport system needs to remain intact and competitive.
So if you're right that it's the low-cost carriers that come out first, it's going to be some of the smaller, more regional airports that are going to be pulling out of this catastrophe earlier, you think?
I would guess so, yes. I mean, as far as we are concerned, we would have no interest in operating from London Heathrow, but we would be having significant interest in operating from other London system airports like Luton, for example, or Gatwick, and the same would go to other geographies. So yes, I think the recovery of the low-cost airports will be faster than the recovery of the prime airports.
Okay, so thank you. Turning then to the next part of the aviation industry, what's your vision, do you think, for the air traffic control sector?
Well, I think, the issue with air traffic control is that air traffic control used to be a national monopoly, then EUROCONTROL got created with the hope that would create efficiency, and as opposed to creating efficiency, it created another layer of cost in the system. So the navigation system is now even more expensive than what it used to be. And I think there is this continuous power struggle between a central control versus national control, which has to be sorted out, because simply this is just not promoting efficiency. I mean, I think Europe has become probably the most inefficient operator in the world relative to other geographies, and it seems that it has become very political, and it is suffering from all sorts of legacies which has to be cut through one way or another. So as far as the navigation system is concerned, our interest is to see efficiency coming through this process and the system, which we are not really seeing it robustly enough.
So you think it's a question of efficiency? Do you think that would be driven forward with competition between the ANSPs?
Not necessarily, but I think a better way of organizing it. I mean, in my mind, I mean, given the the particular kind of interest in Europe, I think it should be centralized as opposed to decentralized, because if you decentralize, you will create a lot of inefficiency and uncoordinated acts between national control. So I think it has to be centralized, but somehow it should be agreed that there is a single European sky, and countries buy into that Central European sky concept and let EUROCONTROL to run it and start eliminating national level cost in the system to make the whole platform more efficient than what it is at the moment.
So in your moving around Europe, you talk to regulators, you talk to governments all the time. Do you talk about a requirement for that sort of national or coordination across Europe for a single sky?
Yes, we do. We do. But I mean, we know that this is a sensitive issue that affects the nation states' privileges. And if I look at the very pandemic issue, how coronavirus has been managed, I mean, the nation state is not giving up, a single point of its rights. They don't concede on anything to get some more efficiency and effectiveness out of the systems through European coordination. And I think it is even a bigger issue when it comes to navigation and control. So, I mean, this is probably the fundamental problem of Europe, that it is so colorful, so many national interests contradicting with each other, and it's almost impossible to do anything on a European basis with that regard. But I know that Eamonn is very strongly promoting the European Single Sky initiative, which I totally endorse and concur with. And I wish him good luck, and we'll do our best at our end to make sure that all the arguments are heard by decision makers, and hopefully one day we're going to be really moving towards that direction. I don't think we have been succeeding on that basis.
Yeah, it's been a long road so far, that's for sure. So the theme of this series of talks is how do we build back better? If I were to ask you what were the 3 or 4 things you think most important for the industry to move, not just back to the way it was, but to move forward, what do we need to do?
The industry has been really struggling with allowing the market forces to come into the industry. I mean, if you look at ownership and control provisions imposed by Europe, by the US, by China, by Russia, and all other players, all other countries, the limitations on movement of capital. And then when it really comes to difficult times like COVID-19, how the nation state acts and which airlines they pick and which airlines they don't, and how they distort the market on that basis. I mean, we have so many legacies in this industry, and somehow we need to start breaking barriers, and we need to start letting market forces flow through this industry. And make sure that we start acting properly. I think this is certainly one issue. We also need to recognize that if we are really serious about the green agenda, and I think the world is going to be increasingly serious about this, we need to create transparency about the performance of the industry and about the performance of each of the players in the industry. There has to be some kind of an eco-labeling that makes it transparent to the world, to all the stakeholders, including the consumers, probably most important to consumers, to understand who performs how and how they are making an impact on the environment. There has been a few initiatives with this regard, but they all got blocked by legacy carriers, basically because they don't come out too well on this. Again, we need to take the politics out of this, and if we are really serious about issues that affect society, we need to take the interest of society and act accordingly. So along these lines, I think we need to start seeing some significant actions.
Right. So letting the market actually be the market, letting the market decide, never forgetting the green agenda. That must be music to the European Commission's ears. Are you speaking to Henrik Holloway and DG Move and those guys?
Yeah, of course I do. Of course, I speak to these gentlemen as well as others, and I think there is an increasing there is an increasing recognition that all these principles are very much in line with the European idea. But let's not forget the European Union is constructed by countries, and especially the strong countries, national interests tend to prevail over the common interest. And I think that makes life quite complicated and difficult to execute against certain issues or certain principles. And as said, I think there is this ongoing kind of power struggle between central forces and the nation states. And depending on the times and depending on the very moment, I mean, you may see one beating the other, or the other is taking a revenge. And now I'm sensing that, given the current times we are in, the nation state is getting stronger and stronger, and grabs the momentum from centralization, common approaches on a European basis.
Yeah. People beating each other up and then taking revenge seems like a perfect moment to talk about labour relations as well, doesn't it? Your new model has the benefit, I presume, your new model has the benefit of not having legacy work practices and so forth. Has that been one of the features of your design?
It is, but the impact of it is probably overestimated. I mean, we are getting a lot of false propaganda in new countries we are getting into, and we are, stepping on the feet of legacy carriers. So if you look at the way we are organizing ourselves, labor cost is only around 10% of the total cost of the business. But if you look at legacy carriers, labor costs tend to be 30+ % of the total business. And really, when you look at labor, it is not really the practices. I mean, we employ people totally appropriately. We are totally lawful. We have to pay competitively, because otherwise they wouldn't work for us. They would work for somebody else. But the real difference comes from the productivity model. I mean, simply we use assets and labor and every resource component in the business more productively than other carriers. So, for example, if you look at a legacy carrier, a pilot would probably fly on average 600 hours a year. We would make our pilots fly 850 hours. I mean, that makes a huge difference, and it is not a matter of money, how much we pay. Our pilots make about the same amount of money in the end, but we get much more productivity out of them. But we tend to outsource many more activities than legacy carriers. We're seeing that we should stay very focused on our core business. We are an airline flying people from A to B, and this is what we should be focused on. And there are other people who are actually better at dealing with other issues, so we let them do that. And actually that helps quite a lot when it comes to times like COVID-19, that you simply share the responsibility for dealing with the situation, so you don't have to deal with the whole issue yourself, but you actually can create quite a strategic alliance to fight issues like COVID-19 and obviously the consequences of that.
Flying, you just said you fly people from A to B, makes me think you don't have any intention to become a network carrier. Is that right?
No, I mean, I think we are a well-defined point-to-point business model, very focused, high productivity, high utilization, the best asset available technology, what we fly, and we get the lowest unit cost out of the aircraft operation. This is the model we are in. This is the model what has made us successful, and this is the model what we are going to stick to going forward. So we have no intention to move away from this. Our intention actually is to spread that model on a broader geographical footing, and this is why we have showed up in certain Western European markets. This is why we are showing up in Abu Dhabi and in other places, that we are expanding geography-wise as opposed to complicating our business model. We are very much adhering to the basic principles.
Right. But then how do you see yourself rubbing along with the legacy carriers 5 years from now? Do you think you will have any sort of passenger transfer alliance or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I don't think we will do that. I mean, this is the legacy paradigm that passengers have to be transferred. Why do they? I mean, I would rather put up a point-to-point network from certain places where legacy carriers can only connect from. So, I mean, we have created a number of airports. We have been putting a number of airports on the map of aviation in Central and East Europe. Previously, they used to be having a few legacy flights connecting people at certain European hub airports, and now they can fly point to point by us. And by the way, looking at it from a European perspective, post-pandemic, more than 50% of the intra-European traffic will be flown by low-cost carriers point to point. So I think this paradigm that hub and spoke is the prevailing business model and people have to get connected through hubs, I think this is going to get over at one point.
Which leads me perfectly to my last two questions. My second last question is, so what do you think the aviation industry will look like in 5 years or maybe 10 years' time?
Well, I think you will see more efficient airlines prevailing, doing much better.
Will we see fewer legacy carriers, do you think?
Well, maybe you will see a few legacy carriers. I mean, I don't think they have no place in the market. They will have some place, but it will be much reduced versus what they think they deserve at this point in time. I think the world is going to go towards more point-to-point, more efficiency in the future. You will have less players, but more robust players. I think it will be a more balanced industry. But the big question mark is, what roles governments will play and the regulator will play into the shaping of the industry going forward.
Will it be a healthier industry?
I would hope so, although today's actions are indicating the complete opposite. All these government actions, some bailouts are not really suggesting that would be the case. But I think if you take a 10-year view, I think it has to be a better industry than what it is today.
Okay, so now my final question to you is, if you could say one thing to Eamonn Brennan at EUROCONTROL, what would you be asking him or telling him?
Oh, I think he should be driven by efficiency. I mean, his only goal should be how to deliver his business at the most efficient and cost-effective way.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you very much indeed. I found that absolutely fascinating. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you did as well. I know I learnt a lot. As I said at the start of this is the first in a series of these Build Back Better seminars. The next one is on the 22nd of September, so put that in your diary if you'd be so kind. And it's my pleasure to say on that occasion we will have the honour of the company of Mr. Willie Walsh. So Joseph, once again to you, thank you again for your really insightful and really helpful comments. I'm very grateful that you made the time to talk to us today. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, I wish you all a very good day.
Thank you.